Your sister's wedding is the family's priority, we can't come to yours, Mom said. I replied, that's fine. They had no idea I owned a $6 million villa in Tuscany when they saw the photos of our ceremony. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. In the high society draft of Chicago, my sister Morgan was the front elevation gilded ornamental designed to catch the light. I was the load-bearing wall, essential for the structure to stand but meant to be covered up with drywall and forgotten. I learned my role early. I was the practical one, the background character in the Morgan show. When I was 10, I asked for a telescope. I wanted to see the rings of Saturn. I wanted to look at something bigger than our suffocating dining room. On my birthday, my mother handed me a professional contouring kit. She told me that boys don't look at girls who look at stars. They look at girls who know how to highlight their cheekbones. I didn't cry. I just put the kit in a drawer and started saving my allowance to buy the telescope myself. That became the pattern. When I brought home a report card with a 4.0 GPA, my father patted my shoulder and said I was lucky to be smart because it made up for my lack of social grace. Lucky, as if I hadn't spent every weekend studying while Morgan was being driven to galas. As if my discipline was an accident of genetics rather than a survival strategy. They thought I was boring. They thought my job as a consultant was some mid-level desk job that paid the rent and nothing more. They didn't know I wasn't just checking spreadsheets. I was a sustainable energy architect. I didn't just design houses. I revolutionized how the ultra-wealthy lived off the grid. I designed proprietary solar storage systems for estates in Dubai, hidden wind turbines for compounds in Aspen. My name was whispered in circles my parents couldn't even pay to enter. I wasn't just solvent. I was wealthy. Quietly, staggeringly wealthy. But I never told them. Why would I? To them, value was only real if it could be posted on Instagram. My value was in the infrastructure deep underground, humming with silent power. That was how I found the chateau. It was a listing that had sat on the market for 3 years. A 17th century estate in Provence, France. $14 million. Most buyers looked at it and saw ruin. The limestone was crumbling, the vineyards were overgrown, and the roof was a disaster. They saw a money pit. I saw bones. I saw a structure that had survived wars and revolutions. It just needed someone to see it, to reinforce it, to clear away the rot. It felt like looking in a mirror. I bought it under an LLC 3 months ago. I didn't tell a soul. I flew there on weekends, walking through the lavender fields that smelled of dust and ancient sun. I ran my hands over the cold limestone walls. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the ugly duckling or the boring sister. I was the lady of the manor. I was building a sanctuary where silence wasn't a punishment, it was a luxury. I was rebuilding the chateau, and in the process I was rebuilding myself. I just didn't realize I would need it so soon. That conversation didn't happen in a scream. It happened over a coffee table that cost more than my first car, in a room that smelled of lilies and old money. Morgan sat on the velvet ottoman clutching her phone like it was a holy relic. "It's Vogue, Taylor," she said, her voice pitched high with that frantic neediness she used as a weapon. "They have an opening for the Real Weddings feature, but it has to be the second weekend of June. The light is better." "That's my date," I said. My voice was level. My mother sighed, the sound of silk rustling against indifference. "Oh, Taylor, be reasonable. You know Morgan's career depends on exposure. You're private. You don't even have an Instagram. Why do you need the prime summer date? November is cozy. It suits you better." "It suits my budget better is what you mean," I said. My father didn't even look up from his tablet. "We're not discussing this. Morgan gets June. We'll pay your change fees if they aren't too exorbitant." I waited for the hurt. I waited for that familiar hot sting of rejection that had defined my childhood. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a sound. It wasn't external. It was inside my chest, a sharp, clean crack, like a dead branch finally giving way under the weight of snow. It was the sound of my obligation breaking. For 30 years, I thought my invisibility was a punishment. I thought I was the prisoner in the tower waiting to be noticed. But looking at them now, Morgan preening my mother, calculating lighting angles, my father dismissing my existence, I realized my invisibility hadn't been a cage, it had been a shield. Because they didn't see me, they couldn't stop me. I had built an empire in the dark while they were blinded by their own flashbulbs. They thought I was weak because I was silent. They didn't understand that silence is where the architect works. Silence is where the blueprint is drawn. They thought I was the survivor of their neglect scraping by. They had no idea I was the conqueror of a world they weren't even qualified to enter. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't try to explain that my budget could buy their entire neighborhood. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I opened the vendor portal for the Chicago venue. My deposit was non-refundable. $25,000. To my parents, losing that kind of money would be a financial tragedy. To me, it was an extraction fee. The cost of doing business, the price of freedom. I tapped the screen. Cancel booking. Confirm. Then I opened the catering contract. Terminate immediately. Fine, I said. The word hung in the air, cool and heavy as polished marble. My mother clapped her hands together. See, I knew you'd understand. It's just logistics, darling. It is, I agreed. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my trousers. It's just logistics. I walked out of that house without looking back. They thought they had won. They thought they had bullied the spare heir into submission. They didn't know I hadn't just canceled a wedding venue, I had just canceled my membership to their family. 3 months later, I was standing on a scaffold 20 feet in the air, smelling of limestone dust and wild thyme. The château was waking up. I had stripped away the rotting velvet drapes and opened the shutters that had been sealed for 50 years. The light here was different, heavy, golden, unrepentant. It poured onto the stone floors I was restoring. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was engineering a masterpiece. I was installing a proprietary solar glass atrium in the central courtyard, invisible technology that would power the entire estate while looking like nothing more than a sheet of crystal sky. My phone buzzed on the workbench below. It had been buzzing for 90 days. I climbed down and wiped my hands on a rag. The screen lit up with a notification from Morgan. Since you saved so much money canceling your venue, Mom says you can cover the photographer upgrade. It's an extra $12,000. Vogue needs specific lighting. Transfer it by end of day. I stared at the message. The audacity wasn't surprising. It was structural. It was the load-bearing pillar of her personality. Then came a voicemail from my mother. I hit play, letting her voice echo against the centuries-old stone walls. Taylor, stop sulking. It's incredibly selfish to go dark like this just because things didn't go your way. We're all stressed trying to make this day perfect for your sister, and your silence is making it about you. Grow up and pick up the phone. They thought I was sitting in a dark apartment in Chicago crying over a pint of ice cream. They thought I was punishing them with silence because I was hurt. They didn't understand the physics of our family. For 20 years, I had been the control group in their experiment of excellence. For Morgan to be the success, there had to be a failure to compare her against. For her to be the beauty, I had to be the beast. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a necessary prop. I was the dark background required for her to shine. By leaving, I hadn't just removed myself. I had broken the mirror. Without me there to look plain and practical, Morgan's extravagance didn't look like triumph anymore. It just looked expensive. They weren't angry because they missed me. They were angry because without the scapegoat, the golden child starts to look a lot like a narcissist. They needed me back in my box so their reality would make sense again. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't return the call. Instead, I opened my banking app. I saw the balance of my liquid assets, a number with enough zeros to buy Morgan's entire wedding venue and turn it into a storage unit. I transferred nothing. I picked up my tablet and approved the schematic for the atrium. The glass would be arriving from Germany tomorrow. The installation would be complete 3 days before Morgan's wedding. They wanted me to pay for the lighting. I smiled, feeling the dry heat of the afternoon on my face. I was paying for the lighting, just not theirs. 5 months before the wedding, I initiated the recruitment phase. In construction, there is a concept called load transfer. When a structural element fails, you don't just patch it. You redistribute the weight to stronger, more reliable columns. My nuclear family was a crumbling facade. It was time to transfer the load to the people who had actually held me up. I opened my laptop on the terrace. The air smelled of lavender and heat. I didn't hire a calligrapher. I didn't buy gold leaf stationery. I simply opened a secure email thread. The list was short. It was the discard pile of the family archives. First, Aunt Marianne, my mother's sister. She had been exiled from the inner circle 5 years ago for the crime of divorcing a wealthy senator who treated her like a prop. My mother called her messy. I called her honest. Second, cousin Rachel, the black sheep who dropped out of law school to open a bakery. My father called her a wasted investment. I remembered her sneaking me books on physics when I was 12, whispering, "Don't let them make you small, Taylor." Third, Grandma Helen. She was 90, frail, and largely ignored at family gatherings because she couldn't hear well and ruined the aesthetic of candid photos. But she was the one who had taught me to read blueprints at her kitchen table. I typed the message. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons to reality. "I'm getting married on June 14th. Not in Chicago. In Provence. You are the only family invited. I'm sending a plane. Pack for the sun." I hit send. I expected questions. I expected hesitation. Instead, I got 3 replies within 20 minutes. "Marianne, finally. Rachel, packing now. Grandma Helen via her nurse, I have a new hat. I'm ready." They didn't ask about Morgan. They didn't ask why. They knew. They had been living in the cold shadow of my parents' conditional love for decades. They recognized the exit door the moment I opened it. 2 weeks later, the real family arrived. Watching them step into the château was like watching a black and white movie suddenly burst into color. In Chicago, family gatherings were stiff, choreographed performances where we stood around kitchen islands afraid to touch the marble. Here, Rachel threw her bag on the 17th century tiles and immediately started opening the shutters. Marianne walked into the vineyard, took a deep breath and started crying, not sad tears but the relief of someone finally exhaling after holding their breath for years. Grandma Helen sat in the courtyard under the solar glass atrium I had finished installing. She looked up at the way the light filtered through the invisible panels illuminating the ancient stone. She touched my hand. "You built this," she said. Her voice was thin but her grip was iron. "You built a cathedral, Taylor." "It's a house, Grandma," I said. "No," she corrected. "It's a fortress." The contrast was visceral. Back in Chicago, my phone was still collecting voicemails from my mother, complaining about the wind off the lake, ruining Morgan's hair trial, and the cost of importing peonies. They were freezing in the wind tunnel of their own expectations. Here we were eating bread and oil on a terrace that had survived revolutions. We were warm. We were solid. I looked at them, my mismatched, imperfect family, and realized I hadn't just invited guests. I had assembled a board of directors who actually had a stake in my happiness. They were the foundation. And for the first time in 30 years, the ground beneath my feet didn't feel like it was about to give way. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. The chateau was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could hear the faint clatter of the local caterers setting up in the courtyard, their hushed French drifting through my open window. I checked my phone. It was 6 in the morning in Provence, which meant it was 11 at night in Chicago. Morgan's rehearsal dinner would be just wrapping up. My feed was flooded with her posts. The countdown begins. Morgan gets more. She had posted a video of the table settings, gold chargers, towering centerpieces of white roses that looked stiff and overhandled, and then a photo that made me stop. It was a close-up of a wine bottle. The label was elegant, minimalist gold leaf on black. The Gold Reserve. Morgan's caption read, "Only the best for my guests. Sourced this ultra-exclusive vintage straight from a private vineyard in Italy. If you know, you know." I laughed. The sound startled a pigeon from the window ledge. She didn't know. She didn't know that the Gold Reserve wasn't Italian, it was French. She didn't know it wasn't sourced by her wedding planner. It was shipped from my cellar. 3 months ago, when I realized the harvest from the chateau's vineyard was going to be exceptional, I had bottled a limited run. I called it L'Or Invisible, the Invisible Gold. I sent 20 cases to a distributor in Chicago, under a shell company name, instructing them to gift it to high-profile events for brand exposure. My mother, always hungry for a free status symbol, had snapped it up instantly when the distributor offered it for the wedding. They were serving my wine. They were pouring my hard work, my soil, my sun into their crystal glasses to toast a marriage built on aesthetics. They were drinking the success of the daughter they called a failure. The irony was so rich I could taste it. I went downstairs. The air was cool, but the sun was already warming the stone. Christopher was in the courtyard, adjusting a vine of jasmine on the archway. He looked up and smiled. "You look dangerous," he said. "I feel dangerous," I replied. "Morgan is serving our wine." He paused, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Does she know?" "No," I said. "Not yet." The ceremony began at golden hour. In Chicago, according to the weather app, it was 45 degrees and raining. A wintry mix that was currently pelting the windows of the yacht club Morgan had booked. I imagined my mother's hair frizzing, the guests shivering in their sleeveless gowns, the gray light making everyone look washed out. Here the light was liquid honey. I didn't wear white. I wore gold, a custom gown structured like a piece of modern architecture with sharp lines and fluid silk that caught the sun. As I walked down the aisle of limestone pavers flanked by ancient olive trees, I looked at the faces waiting for me. Aunt Marianne wiping her eyes. Cousin Rachel holding her phone up to capture the light. Grandma Helen sitting in her wheelchair with a blanket over her lap looking like a queen. And Christopher standing under the solar atrium I had built waiting for me in the house I had saved. It wasn't a performance. It was a grounding. I reached the altar. The officiant, a local mayor who had become a friend, began to speak about foundations, about how love like a house needs strong bones before it needs decoration. Rachel was live streaming. She had only a few hundred followers, mostly family and friends from back home, the B-list guests who hadn't made the cut for Morgan's exclusive 300-person list. As I said my vows, promising to build a life of substance and truth, Rachel's phone buzzed, and then buzzed again, and again. I didn't know it then, but the algorithm had picked up the stream. The contrast was too perfect. The rejected sister in a golden French château versus the chosen sister in a rainy Chicago ballroom. The title of Rachel's stream, The Real Royal Wedding. By the time Christopher kissed me, the viewer count had jumped from 50 to 5,000. By the time we walked back down the aisle showered in dried lavender, it was 50,000. The photos were already out there. The sun-drenched stone. The architectural dress. The undeniable staggering wealth and taste that radiated from every pixel. And in Chicago, guests were sitting down to dinner, checking their phones under the table, waiting for the speeches to start. The signal was about to hit. The notification didn't sound like a bomb. It sounded like a ripple. One phone lit up at table 4, then 2 at table 7, then a dozen. In the ballroom of the Chicago Yacht Club, the speeches were beginning. My father was holding a microphone, preparing to tell a room full of people how Morgan had always been the family's shining star. He tapped the mic, smiling that tight, rehearsed smile he wore for business partners. But nobody was looking at him. They were looking at their screens. My cousin Rachel had posted the money shot. It wasn't just a picture of a wedding. It was a portrait of a dynasty. It showed me standing on the terrace of the château at sunset, the golden light hitting the solar glass atrium behind me, illuminating the ancient stone like a halo. The caption was simple: the owner, the architect, the bride, the real royal wedding. And then the second photo, a screenshot of the property deed Rachel had accidentally left visible on the table, showing my name next to the $14 million valuation. I wasn't there to see it, but Aunt Marianne told me later that the silence in that ballroom was louder than any scream. My mother was the first to realize. She leaned over a guest's shoulder, her face arranged in a polite mask of curiosity. I imagined the moment the pixels registered in her brain. She saw the rental she had mocked, she saw the boring daughter she had dismissed, and she saw the scale of it. The sheer undeniable magnitude of what I had built while she was busy critiquing my hair. She stood up. Her hand went to her throat. She literally gasped for air, as if the oxygen in the room had been sucked out by the vacuum of her own regret. Morgan saw her reaction. She grabbed a phone from a bridesmaid. She scrolled. She saw the chateau, and then her eyes drifted to the bottle of wine sitting in front of her, the gold reserve she had been bragging about all night. She looked at the label, then she looked at the photo of my vineyard. The rows of grapes were identical. The logo on the bottle matched the iron crest on my gate. She realized she wasn't just upstaged. She was a prop in my play. She was serving my success to her guests. She dropped the phone. It cracked on the floor, but nobody noticed. In Provence, the sun had fully set. The air was cool and smelled of jasmine. I sat at the long table with my new husband and my real family, eating bread dipped in oil from my own trees. I felt a vibration in the air, a shift in the universe's center of gravity. For years I thought justice meant watching them fall. I thought revenge meant burning their house down. But sitting there, surrounded by the people who had helped me pour the foundation, I realized I had been wrong. Real justice isn't destruction. It's creation. They had spent their lives building a stage, obsessed with the performance, with the lighting, with the audience. I had spent my life planting a garden. I had dug in the dirt. I had weathered the storms. I had sowed seeds in the dark while they laughed at my dirty hands. And now it was harvest time. I looked at the olive trees, ancient and heavy with fruit. I didn't hate my family in that moment. Hate is too active. Hate requires energy. What I felt was the profound, quiet satisfaction of the sower, who watches the weeds choke themselves out while her own crop thrives. I didn't steal their spotlight, I just turned on the sun. And when you stand next to the sun, a flashlight looks awfully dim. The aftermath didn't come with an explosion. It came with a quiet, desperate scratching at the door. In the week following the wedding, my phone didn't stop buzzing, but the tone had shifted. The imperious demands and cold ultimatums were gone, replaced by a frantic attempt to rewrite history. Morgan sent a text, "Everyone is asking about your venue." I told them, "You've always had such an incredible eye for design. We should collaborate on something, sisters taking over the world, right?" She was trying to pivot. She was trying to attach her sinking brand to my rising star. She didn't want a sister, she wanted a collab. My mother left a voicemail. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual command. "Taylor, we didn't realize. Why didn't you tell us? We would have been so proud. We just want to see you. We miss you." They missed the access. They missed the reflection of success I could have provided. They missed the feeling of being superior, which was the only currency our family had ever traded in. I didn't block them. Blocking implies emotion. It implies that their words still have the power to hurt me. Instead, I simply muted the notifications. I let their messages pile up in the digital void unanswered. Silence, I had learned, was the loudest answer of all. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of the vineyard with Christopher. The summer heat was settling over Provence, turning the air thick and sweet. We talked about irrigation systems and harvest schedules. We talked about building a nursery for the olive trees. We didn't talk about Chicago. Chicago felt like a different planet, one whose gravity could no longer reach us. That evening, we set the table in the courtyard for dinner. Aunt Marianne was staying for another week. Rachel and Grandma Helen were playing cards on the terrace. I set 5 places. And then I set a 6th. It was a simple wooden chair at the end of the table. I didn't put a plate on it. Instead, I took a spool of velvet ribbon from my pocket, olive green, the color of endurance. I tied it around the back of the chair in a simple loose knot. Christopher watched me wiping a wine glass. "For them?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, "for the possibility." I ran my hand over the wood of the chair. "I'm not waiting for them to sit here. I'm not keeping the seat warm. But I'm also not burning the chair." For years, I thought forgiveness meant letting them back in to hurt me again. I thought boundaries meant building a wall so high I couldn't see the sky. But looking at that ribbon fluttering gently in the warm breeze, I understood the final lesson of the architect. You build a door, you put a lock on it, you hold the key. If they ever do the work, if they ever strip away the facade, reinforce their own crumbling foundations, and learn to walk through that door with love instead of demands, the chair is there. But until then, it remains empty, and the emptiness doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels like space. I sat down at the head of the table. I poured my wine from my earth. I looked at the faces of the people who had chosen me, illuminated by the solar light I had captured. I raised my glass. To the builders, I said. And we drank. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to know they are worth more than their family's approval. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth.